Hi, this is Dr. Paris, and this week we are discussing religions of Africa. Last week we briefly talked about Anansi the spider, a trickster from African lore, and this week we'll look more closely at religion on the continent, focusing a great deal of our attention on ancient Egyptian religion. An important question to ask when studying religion is, how important is setting to religion? When I think about setting in religion, I consider my own location. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is known as the buckle of the Bible Belt. A number of people who live in the South consider the Bible the inspired Word of God. Near downtown Nashville, there's a statue of the Christian evangelist Billy Graham. So it's very important to think about our own setting when we think about religion. But when I think about setting, I'm not just talking about my own location and what people in my area think about religion. I need to take a look at how geography affects religion. Factors like climate, land formations, and weather, because the physical world often shapes our understanding of the spiritual world. So let's review something that we didn't cover in the last video on religions of the Americas. Huacas are part of Incan religion. They're defined as natural phenomenon that provide unusual manifestations of the holy. Unusual rocks, for example, could symbolize the presence of the holy. In other cultures, trees or rivers may be considered sacred. And in the modern world, we tend to think that buildings where people worship and practice religion are sacred places. But nature can be considered sacred. Something like hiking through the woods and sitting on a rock can give you a time to rest and reflect on life, and the ancients probably felt the same way. And some trees and rocks came to have special meanings for them. Examples of huacas include unusual appearances in stones, plants, animals, or people, stars, and constellations. The Incas found evidence of the spiritual world in the natural world. When they saw these rock formations, it made them think of a different world. When they looked up in the sky at night, it made them think of the spirit world. Now, for ancient Egyptians in northern Africa, the Nile was sacred. And we can see that the Egyptians live in a desert climate, but the Nile brought life to the region. And the setting of the Egyptians affected not only their views of this world, but their views about the next world, something they referred to as the afterlife. In Egypt, it is possible to have one foot on fertile land enriched by the Nile and another foot on dry, parched desert earth that seems devoid of life. The Egyptians depended on the Nile to flood each year so they could grow crops. If the Nile did not flood or less water flowed into the region, the Egyptians could suffer. They were literally a step between life and death. So let's think about how some of their beliefs about the afterlife arose because of the desert climate in which they lived. Let's imagine that a traveler is going through the desert on a camel. He spies something up ahead. Is the desert deceiving him with a mirage, or is something else going on? As he approaches the object and it doesn't disappear into the sands, he sees a dead body that the desert has preserved by removing all of the moisture from the corpse. And perhaps it gives him ideas about the afterlife. If the desert preserves the body, perhaps there is something beyond this life. The desert climate probably gave the Egyptians ideas about mummification. Once they realized that bodies could be preserved, they felt a responsibility to prepare for the afterlife. And Egyptians spent a great deal of time making preparations for the afterlife, not just becoming mummified, but preparing things to be with them in the next life. The Egyptians even had a concept of a soul that they called a Ba. They viewed it as a kind of human consciousness. Because of their concerns about the afterlife, Egyptians feared dying outside of Egypt. An ancient Egyptian story about a man named Sinuhe tells of the main character fleeing Egypt in the midst of fear and pandemonium. Sinuhe makes a good life outside of Egypt, but he has to return home before he dies, because no good Egyptian wants to die outside of Egypt, because he or she won't be ready for the afterlife. While people like Sinuhe feared dying outside of Egypt and made plans for the afterlife, others were not so sure. There's a text entitled A Dispute Between a Man and His Ba. Remember here that Ba means soul. In this text, the man expresses religious skepticism. He wonders if all of the funeral preparations really matter. We see a lot of religious skepticism in our day, so it's interesting to see that even the ancients wrestled with their beliefs. And this issue brings us back to two terms that we covered in the introduction. Agnosticism. An agnostic says, I do not know whether God exists. And then there's atheists. Atheism is the belief that there is no person like God. Now the man disputing with his Ba is expressing agnostic thoughts. In the end, he decides to prepare for the afterlife, but he still struggles with the question. Atheism, however, is more of a modern-day phenomenon. Atheism is virtually unheard of in the ancient world. In the ancient world, everyone believes in a god, and most likely, everyone believes in multiple gods. Throughout the history of Egypt, most people practice polytheism, and by polytheism I mean the belief in two or more person-like gods. However, there is a monotheistic revolution in Egypt. King Amenhotep championed the worship of the one god Aten during the Amarna age. He moved Egypt's capital and changed his name to Akhenaten to honor his god. But his monotheistic ideas didn't last long because his successor, King Tut, returned Egypt to polytheism. And we can imagine here, as we talk in future lectures about religion and economics, that many of the priests of the other gods were all of a sudden out of favor and were losing money and gifts that people brought when they came to sacrifice and make offerings to the other gods. So probably that's why polytheism came back. Since we've talked about monotheism and polytheism, let's review henotheism as well as the term trickster. You'll remember that henotheism is the belief that multiple gods exist, but one supreme deity rules over them all. For example, in Yoruba religion, Olorun is the supreme deity of the sky. Other gods exist, but Olorun is the top god. So we've kind of got the best part of polytheism and the best part of monotheism. Henotheism takes monotheism's one god and puts that one god as the supreme god over the many gods, which polytheism would prefer. In continuing to talk about Yoruba religion, another Yoruba god is Esu. He's a trickster. Notice that Matthew says he is amoral. That means he's not good or evil. We've discovered that tricksters often deceive others and try to outwit them, but their seemingly negative actions often accomplish great purposes. But how can anyone know the will of the gods? Well, that's where diviners come in. Diviners were spirit-possessed individuals, often women, who knew how to discover people's destinies, and we can refer to them as liminal figures. They live in this world, but they know how to walk in the spirit world. And if you're wondering about your destiny for this class, I can't tell you your future, but I can let you know that studying these terms will help you be better prepared for this week's quiz and the midterm. So we've reviewed some terms we've already discussed, such as henotheism and monotheism, and we've added terms like Ba and diviners and Wakas. And you may be interested in studying the additional topics on this slide. For example, as you read Matthew's, it might not be a bad idea to make a list of rites of passage in different religions. You may even find that rites of passage could be a good topic for your paper that's due in November. You might want to focus in on one particular rite of passage in a particular religion. You might want to review several of them, or do some combination of that where you mention a bunch of them but you focus on one. So keep those things in mind as you read the chapters. And as always, please contact me if you have any questions. Take care.